Okay, guys, we are on day 8 of the Diddy trial, and I have to say, I don't know if I'm proud of my profession or embarrassed right now. My colleague testified, Dr. Don Hughes, and I'm just wondering if it was her fault or the lawyers. So what I'm thinking is that the lawyers didn't know how to use her and they didn't know how to use her expertise properly, because what they could have done is tied what she was saying to trafficking and racketeering, but instead it fell flat, and maybe they'll link it to something in the future, right? Because we're building a case. We're in week 2. The United States is coming after Sean Combs, and this is going to happen. He's going to go away. I think that they are building the case of trafficking and racketeering, but every witness that takes the stand needs to be a significant impact on the jury. So let's go through this day. It started with the previous agent, and he went ahead and finished talking about the raid and the 80 to 90 agents that entered Star number 2, Star Island. Now, Emily knows everything, and her video was saying that because she's there in the court, that they didn't go into one Star Island, the other house, and that Sean Combs' son actually made a song saying that they duped the feds and that everything was hidden in that house. Okay, so you're just basically like admitting to it. So now the feds just need to find the evidence. I don't know. I can't believe people actually write songs that are like incriminating, self-incriminating songs, and that they're nitwits. I can't believe they actually do it. Anyway, so they went on about the stuff that was found in the house. We've got tons of high heels, like stripper heels, high heels, tons of them. All of these sex items, tons of cell phones. I think cell phones hidden in Balenciaga boots. Maybe they were Kim K's. Who knows? We've got a Gucci bag that I think had drugs in it, and they really made a point of saying, like, look at this Gucci bag to this guy, but they wouldn't show or let him talk about who was carrying the Gucci bag. So I'm guessing it was like another celebrity that they do not want to be named or a part of this trial. But really, if you go to consignment, you can get Gucci bags like fairly cheap, like the old school ones. So I'm kind of curious, like, which one it was. Was it the Messenger? Was it new? Gold. Anyway, so they found, like, a white plastic bottle with liquid meth and MDMA. There were pills with a Tesla imprint, Xanax. What I find interesting is that they have prescription bottles. Now, these prescriptions are written out to Frank Black. Now, Diddy is not that bright, right? He's really driven by his Tootsie Roll. So he named his AKA was Frank Black, and he's making fun of like Biggie's white. So it's just ridiculous. This is all ridiculous. But the fact that people are seriously injured and people are unalived, likely because of this man, it's wild. And it all just starts because he wants to get his Tootsie Roll off. Um, so again, we have all of this stuff is found: 31 bottles of Astroglide, 25 bottles of baby oil. I'm sure there were more in the other house. Um, and it just keeps going. There's boxes with the name Puffy on it, and there's more drugs and shit in there. The defense made a point of saying, well, you handcuffed 6 people while you did this search. You came in by sea and land, and don't you think that's kind of like really extreme? And the agent was careful to say, no, we didn't handcuff 6 people for an hour. We handcuffed one individual for about an hour because they were resisting, and this is potentially a massive investigation. So it sounded like the defense attorney, like, maybe she's like learning, she's just kind of getting her ropes, understanding, because she didn't do a really good job. And then I think what she did was she actually set herself up to prove the prosecution's racketeering. So she asked if there were photos of Sean Combs with guns. She asked if there was DNA of Sean Combs. And the guy said, I don't know. She asked if there were fingerprints found on these weapons, like the AR-15s and a 45. And, who knows, right? Well, if they're not his, but they're in his property, then what were they being used for other than racketeering and using them against people to build this criminal enterprise? So not I think that was kind of like a fuck up on her part. And then she ended with just the stupidest statement. You could tell like she was kind of like flustered and this is just based on people's impressions because I wasn't there. But she asked this Florida agent, do you like a lot of people have guns in Florida? And he was like, yeah. And there was an objection. And then she was like, well, do you have guns in your home because you live in Florida? And he was like, yeah. Well, of course, he's an agent. Like, well, that was just this stupidest question to end on. Like, okay, it's cool that like Sean Combs has numerous AR-15s, semi-automatic, there's handguns, and there's drugs everywhere. That's totally cool. And the serial numbers are all scratched off because that's the same as a special agent carrying his official weapon. What the so, anyways, then we have the next expert. We have Dr. Dawn Hughes, who has testified with R. Kelly. She has testified, she was lately in the Amber Heard trial, and the lawyers made her look pretty bad in that trial, and she was pretty reactive. That could be partly like her New York accent. But she came on to basically educate the jury on what domestic violence, what abuse, what it really looks like, and what it does to individuals and why they don't leave the relationship. So what she kind of talked about was that psychological bonds are formed and there are psychological consequences of abuse. This is everything I've talked about all over my social media as well. All of this that I'm going to say is so true and so valid and so real. I just don't know if it was the way it was presented and tied together was the best. So she talks a lot about how individuals who are abused are fearful of the physical violence, but they're also they have butterflies. They have little moments of trepidation, and so violence isn't always fear isn't always because of violence. Fear comes in all these different forms. And I think it's extra dangerous that with Sean Combs, he wasn't necessarily consistent in his fear, in his physical violence. It was impulsive at times, it was drug induced at times. And Cassie didn't know exactly when it was coming. So, when he wanted to beat the living shit out of her with a frying pan, it wasn't that she knew that was coming, right? So, she's going to over time internalize this trepidation, this anticipation for violence. And so why would she speak out or stop or leave when she's fucking terrified? So there's this level of intimidation that he used. He definitely like Dawn was describing, he was throwing things all the time and then telling her what she can't do. Dawn did mention something about a laptop, and then there was an objection which the judge sustained. So it did show that, I don't know, something about a laptop going on. Maybe we'll see that come into play. Sexual abuse added to violence makes things much, much worse. We obviously know that. It's going to make things more psychologically confusing, blurry, and there's going to be a shit ton more psychological fear in the victim. There's so many reasons that this type of abuse prevents the person from leaving. And what she said was degradation, and they don't want to think about it. Like if you're going to leave, you have to think about how bad the abuse is, and you can't minimize it. You have to really have a plan, and you have to rationalize why you're leaving, and it has to be really solid. Well, that's nearly impossible when you've been gaslit minute by minute, hour to hour for years and years, and you don't trust your intuition and you don't trust your instincts. So you may think that he is hurting you and you need to leave, and you may feel really, really clear on that. But then he goes and he love bombs you. So she described that as well, love bombing, the honeymoon phase of the domestic violence cycle. The abuser showers the person with gifts and affection to get her back. That's exactly what he would do. And these attempts to leave happen over and over. So there's abuse, then the person wants to leave, then they get this honeymoon, then they get loved bombed, then it's quiet for a little bit until the suspense, the tension, the psychopathic, sadistic, fucking Tootsie Roll mind builds back up, and he goes and he like beats her again. There's just no way to actually leave. There's no way over time to leave cleanly. And I'm so happy she finally did. And I'm not exactly sure what got her to that point of getting out inside emotionally. So, and she talks about how emotional abuse is like putting someone down, making people feel like they're a piece of crap. Doing that to a loved partner, that's a lovely thing. Yeah. Um, so we went on, and again, she's detailing abuse and coping mechanisms. And one key point is that she says self medicating and doing drugs, even away from the abuser, can be a coping mechanism. It's not a healthy one, but it is one that Cassie learned over time. Cassie, again, was groomed into relationships first with this Mr. Leslie and then with Combs. And so when you don't have healthy coping skills, uh, drugs are a pretty way to fog your mind and not realize the pain and the trauma and the abuse that you are enduring. I would really like a quantitative analysis of Sean Combs and Cassie's sobriety versus substance use, and like how every minute they lived their lives over all of this time, because they were either anticipating using drugs, or hungover. And when is there clarity? I mean, some of these drugs don't leave your system for a long time, like weeks and weeks and weeks. Again, that wasn't mentioned in any of this. The biggest thing is that victims self-blame. So you internalize the gaslighting, you internalize the verbal, the physical, the sexual abuse, and you start to think that you deserve it. You start to think that you earned it. In fact, the abusers are telling you you earned it, right? So over time, you don't trust yourself, and you start to think that you deserved it. You're blaming yourself. And that's why so many people, once they get out of these violent relationships and things actually settle, then they get really fucking angry. They get so angry that all of this happened, but the anger isn't during it, it's after. They don't feel it. They don't have permission to feel it in it. So they talked about Dr. Hughes's salary. I don't know, her money, $600 an hour, $6,000 a day. I'd say actually that's kind of on the low end for somebody with this high level, this profile. She be getting way more. But it's interesting because they didn't poke holes in that. They said, well, is most of your money, or most of your money comes from these legal cases? And she said, no, about half. Well, I would poke right at that. So if it's half, does that mean you're charging your clients, your individual therapy clients, $600 an hour too? Because no, she is making the majority of her money through these expert cases, and then she's making a lower level amount in any other work, which any other psychologist in this field would be making as well. So, okay, I'm not really sure, entirely what this showed. I mean, she talked about minimization. She talked about how Cassie would minimize things. And if you're minimizing things, then you're basically like a walking bruise, and you're just saying, I can take a punch, I can take another one, I can take another one. And so you're just getting like deeper and deeper wounds. And an individual who's in a domestic violence relationship does not understand that these wounds are accruing and deepening and leading to, broken bones, or however we want to say it. So it ends up basically increasing their risk for injury if they minimize. So she went on to talk about, power is probably the biggest reason people don't leave, because Cassie didn't have access to her money, her car, her keys. I mean, she probably, there were times where she didn't even have her passport because he had thrown her off a yacht. So there's all of these reasons. Power is a huge one why she didn't leave and why women don't leave. And if it's not about money, it's still about power, because men can be very powerful, even poor men. Abuse is very powerful. In the cross-examination, I don't know, it was relatively pointless. They asked her about malingering. People all over the internet are trying to talk about like what malingering is, and they're saying, you're feigning emotional responses. Well, that's actually feigning. So malingering is when you lie for monetary gain, and feigning is when you are changing if your emotions or presentation is worse or better. You want to look sicker, you want to look more healthy, and that's feigning. And it's not necessarily for a monetary gain. It may just because you want to change people's impressions of you. Again, the defense didn't take this anywhere, so I don't really know what the point was. They're trying to discredit Dawn by saying, doesn't the APA? So I'm sure they like quickly were like Googling who governs a psychologist. Doesn't the American Psychological Association say you should only render an opinion after examination? Yes, it does. If you're examining the person and you're opining to their mental state as an expert. Dawn wasn't brought in for that. She was brought in to educate the jury on the domestic violence cycle, which she did. So this defense lawyer was not prepared. And again, don't get into the weeds with the psychologist about what a psychologist does because you'll never know enough, right? Stay in your lane. Let the psychologist explain what the psychologist does. When you get into the woods and you start picking it apart with an expert and it's not your field, it's not going to end well. So I just don't think they used her, and I don't think they discredited her well, but I'm glad she made a buck for doing this. But again, what they could have done is they could have said, where do you get your opinions? What is it based in? Where's the science? Where are the peer-reviewed, evidence-based journals that you're getting this information from? Because if you didn't meet the victim, we need to bolster your claims some other way, and that is through validating the science behind what you're claiming. And I didn't hear any of that come through. So they just tried to kind of discredit her. And then I think he mentioned Brian Steele, who's Sean Combs's attorney, and how he didn't want to hire Dawn on another case. And then they wanted to like close with that. Like that was really a gut punch. Well, you know what? Like we don't get hired on every case. Attorneys look at experts. They look at dozens and dozens of experts and they try to find the right fit for their case. So I hope the jury, well, actually, jury, I know you're watching. I hope you realize that this is a bunch of bullshit. And again, they contradicted themselves again. So they're saying that it is a domestic violence case, right? They're trying to say that it's not sex trafficking and racketeering. But they end with saying that they didn't want to use Dawn for a domestic violence case. Okay, why not? Because you're saying she's an expert in domestic violence. Okay, so you just proved prosecution's point again that she's offering things that go beyond domestic violence. So George Kaplan came on, and I think he'll be on tomorrow. He worked for Combs Enterprises from 2013 to 2015, and it sounds like he quit because he watched a pretty brutal beating of Cassie, which sounds like a lot of people watched and no one did a fucking thing about it because they were so terrified of this monster. But again, he's not just one person. He has an enterprise. He has a company. He has people working for him. And this is where we are building in the case. I cannot wait to find this out. So he talked about how he was promoted. He reported to Christina Coram. She did everything. He worked 80 to 100 hours a week. Why are people going after him for like employment issues? Salary started at like 125,000 a year for that many hours a week. Let's compute that. That's not much. He said that his job was threatened constantly. He was kind of one of the runners who would go get the illicit substances, but he'd also go get the prescriptions. And again, they showed images of the prescription bottles. They did not show the doctor who prescribed them. They did show the pharmacy. A lot was brought from Walgreens. I would like to know, who is this licensed medical provider who is prescribing things to Frank Black? Because now we have another extension of racketeering being brought in. This enterprise goes above and beyond anything that we have heard yet. And boy, he liked drugs. There's so many drugs. And he took Advil too, with ketamine and MDMA and ecstasy and cocaine and, oh my God, everything, right? And then another key point that they ended on was that George cleaned the rooms. They loved the Trump hotel, right? He had keys to the Trump hotel. Now, politically, people are trying to tie this to Trump in some way. Highly doubt it. This goes to like lower management of a hotel, right? But uh, George would clean up after these freak offs and he didn't want hotel staff to do it. So there is some coercion going on with an outside entity with the hotel staff. He said it was because he didn't want people to take pictures of the scene and then, like what, the jizz all over the place, and then sell it to the media. But again, here we have this small piece of, okay, we have a massive hotel entity tied into this, and we have this coercion. So once again, we're building the case for RICO. I am hopeful. I like where this is going. I'm available to take the stand if you need somebody to be a little more explicit about abuse and psychology and what the fuck this monster has going on in his head. See you tomorrow.